Consuming APIs is something you can't avoid when building web applications, but it can get confusing and there are multiple steps you need to get right. In this video, I'll show you how to fetch data from external APIs in an ASP.NET Core MVC application. We'll build the car inventory app and walk through all the essential steps from understanding the API to creating a service to fetch the data, registering that service, and using HttpClient correctly. Plus, we'll also cover how to filter the data you need from the API using data transfer objects and display it in your app. I have just created an MVC application in Visual Studio. I've selected the latest .NET version, .NET 9, and before we get going, the first step is going to be to go ahead and check our API, which we're going to consume for our project, so that we know how we can go about it, how we'll create the models. So this is a website I just found for the purpose of this video. It was the HttpClient API. Basically, it's a public API that offers data for different types of cars. If we check this API, so we see that it has a count property here, a message, search criteria, and the results. And actually, we are going to create firstly a model to get the response from the API. I think we don't need this third property here. And after we get this response in our service, we are then going to actually filter it for the data that we need. For this reason, we're going to use DTOs, data transfer objects. We're going to create another model that will take the data that we need, let's say make ID and make name inside the results. And whenever we make a call to a database or an API, getting all the data that this API has, even the ones we do not need, it's actually not recommended. It's a waste of resources, performance, etc. So this is how our API looks like. Now let's go ahead and go to create our two models. Inside our blank project here, I'm going to create a couple of models. And here we have our two models. The first one I've called NHTSA, the name of the API response. So here we're going to get data from the API. And here in the other model, I named car DTO, which is actually only the data that you are going to need. I've included here just the make ID and the make name or the brand name here. So basically we are going to filter from the API response that we take. We're going to filter the results to only get this data. We're going to see how this works. The second step now is actually to go ahead and create our service. So inside the service, this is where we write the functionality to consume the API or to make any major functionality in our application. And as a good practice, actually, we need to firstly create a couple folders, a data folder. Inside of it, we store all of the services of our application, even though in our case, we're gonna have only one. So inside this services folder, I'm gonna go ahead and create first an interface where we basically write the signature or the blueprint for our service. Click on new item, interface. Let's name our car interface. And then I'm going to create a class, a simple C# class for the service named car service, which is going to implement the interface that we created after we write it. And now that we have these two files, I'm going to go ahead and go to the program.cs file where we are going to need to register these services. Just wanted to let you know this video was created based on a request from a member inside my .NET Squad community. Each month, members can request content on topics they need help with or find hard to learn elsewhere. Along with that, you get weekly direct support and guidance to help you get unstuck faster in .NET. And it's a place you can turn to with others learning alongside you whenever you have a question or your code isn't working. There's a free trial running at the moment and it's not always available, so if this sounds like something that could really help you, now's the perfect time to give it a try for free. Now back to the video. Here in the services container, we need to write builder.services.add HttpClient, and I'm just going to explain in a bit what this is. And here we specify this service and the interface, which I have actually named wrong here. It should be like our service Let's just change this really quick here. And the service here. So we are registering this service here by adding an HTTP client to it. HTTP client is a class that allows us to make API calls and get responses giving a URL to an API provider, what we actually need in our case. So we are both registering the service and giving that instance of the service an HTTP client. And this is the place where we actually specify the configurations for the HTTP client that will be given to our service. Things like the base address, which we're gonna do right now, or API keys in case the API requires that, or login configurations if the API requires us to be logged in to make a request to an API. But in our case, we are just gonna need to specify the base address of this API that we're going to call. So here I'm going to specify the base address, which will be a new URI. And here we'll specify the base address in our appsettings.json file. And this is how we're going to access it, builder.configuration. And here inside square brackets, I will specify this address in, let's say, car API base URL. We haven't created this yet, but that's the first thing I'm gonna do right now. So going to appsettings.json right now, and yeah, let's specify the car API here. And here the base URL of our API. And if we go back to the API, actually what a base URL is this part until the API. And then inside the app, we then specify the other part that we need from this API. In case we would actually make different requests to different parts of the API, we specify that inside code, and this is what we are going to take to store in connection string. Let's go back to the program.cs file. And we are still kind of getting an error here, but this will be fixed as soon as we go and take care of the service and the interface. Actually, this happens because we haven't implemented this service, the interface in our service class. So this is our next step, just going to the services folder, firstly to the interface to define the signature of our service. So this will be an asynchronous method inside the service. So that's why I'm writing task here, the keyword, and then this will return a list of car DTOs. So this is the data that our method, our service will return, that we will use in the controller later on. And then I'm just gonna name this get cars. That's about it. I just need to import the models folder just like that. Okay, so let me go to the service class and implement this interface. If I click here, if I just click on the option to implement the interface, this is our method that's implemented, but we need to modify it a little bit. And the first thing I'm actually gonna take care of here is that we're going to have a constructor where we'll take the HTTP client class, which we're going to use to make the API call. We talked about this a bit earlier. So firstly, I'm just going to need a private read-only variable of HTTP client and name it underline HTTP client. And if you hover over this, you will see that HTTP client provides a class for sending HTTP requests and receiving HTTP responses from a resource identified by a URI. Let me write the constructor here. Public car service. Okay, we're taking the HTTP client in our constructor, and we're giving to this variable the value of HTTP client, which we'll use in our method underneath. Okay, I need the async keyword in our method. Here, firstly, I'm going to take a variable to store the response after we make the call to the API. Right, the await keyword when we're making the call. And here we're using the HttpClient dot get from JSON async. And this method basically sends a GET request to the specified URI and gets the response back from it. Here we need to specify actually the type of data that we are expecting, which is going to be this NHTSA response model that we created. So here we are receiving this kind of data. And the last thing here is going to specify the other remaining part of the URL. So if you remember, we specified the base URL in the service class. So the HTTP client that we have in our service is already configured with a base URL. Now we just need to specify this remaining part here. So after vehicles, and let's go back to the service and paste it right here. Here we are just going to need to make a short if clause to check if the response is null or not. Okay, let me change the wording here. So in case the response.results, which is this object that we're taking here, is null, we just need to return a new list of car DTO. So basically our method here is returning a list of car DTOs. In this case, we'll just return an empty list. In case the results are not null, then in this part of the code here, we're actually going to use the data transfer objects, so our car DTO model, and we're going to map this data, this API response that we're taking, and just create an object of car DTO, and that's the only data that we're then going to use in our controller and in our view pages. So we are going to return here a response.results. Here we're selecting. Here as well we're creating a car DTO object, and we're mapping here the data from our response. So the make ID of the new object we're creating will be the make ID that we take from the item or from the response we're getting from the API. And then the make name or the brand name will be equal to what we get from the response as well. And we are returning this object back as the result of the method that we just created here. We just made the call to the API right here. We checked if it was null. If it was, we're just returning an empty object, car DTO list of objects. If not, we are mapping the result in a DTO, which will contain only these two properties that we're going to use and in our controller and then in our view page to display the data. Okay, this is then the last part of the project. I'm just gonna go ahead and quickly create a controller, an empty controller. Let's name it like cars controller. And I'm gonna need like a private read-only car service interface here. Okay, so that we will need to use the service that we just created, and then we'll create the constructor here. This would be an asynchronous method. So we need the async keyword and the task keyword here for the response. And simply what we need here is just a cars variable. Here we're going to await the method here, so we'll use the car service and then the get cars method that we created there to get the data from our API, and then inside the view we are just going to return the view with all of this data that we're getting from the service, that we're getting actually from our API. The last step is just going to need to create a simple view so that we display this data. So I'm going to the views folder, creating a folder for the cars controller. And here I just need like a simple index view page. We're gonna make the simplest view page actually possible. So I just gonna take a header, like list of cars, and just like a UL list. Here I'm just having like a for each loop to loop through all the data we need to specify the model that we're getting inside our view, which will be of type IEnumerable, since we're getting a list of this data. So here, let me just write the name of our application. This is the data that our view is going to take, and back to the for each loop now. I'm looping through a variable, let's name it car, in the model that our page is taking from the controller. Let's just have a list element, and let's say we will display car.makeName only. Let me run the project and go to this specific URL. Okay, it seems the directory here is somehow wrong. Let me just try and... Okay, it's known just as it is. Okay, if I go to /cars, which was the name of the controller, there we have the list of all of the cars that we're taking from the API. So everything seemed to work. We have made a request to an API, we have taken the data, tailored the data that we need with the data transfer objects, specified the service in our program.cs file, specified the base URL in the settings.json file, app settings.json. We have added the HttpClient in the service, and then we have taken all of the data from our service inside the controller, only the data we need, and displayed it simply in a view page. If you have any questions, you can surely leave them down below. Otherwise, if you're brand new to REST APIs and have questions about it, actually I have a totally beginner-friendly course, which should be on the screen, so just click on it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.